Hey Buddha Jim, this is Punkoutlaw. I think there's some things that are missed about capitalism. Is that capitalism is just a system. I mean, it's not an entity. It has no brain. It has no heart. It has no thought process. It is just an economic system. And while I can pick a screwdriver up and I can use it to build something, I can also take a screwdriver and jab it in somebody's throat and kill them.
Okay, remind me to keep you away from the screwdrivers. I think it should be clear that my videos are attacking capitalism as a system, not as some thing or, mysterious entity. It is an economic system. And economics is the social science that studies the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Capitalism is a system of distributing goods and services. And it does a horrible job. When I point out that there is an oversupply of housing on one hand and millions of homeless people on the other hand, I think you may be misunderstanding me. It's not that that happens and that, these are bad people doing bad things. It's that makes sense within capitalism. It makes sense that you can have an oversupply of milk and have to dump out millions of gallons of milk while 30,000 people around the world starve. That makes sense. That is the critique. That is what's crazy about it. That you can have an oversupply of housing and millions of people homeless. And that makes sense to you. That is a cogent, rational argument within capitalist economics. So it's a valid criticism, and I think it points to the fundamental weaknesses of that system. I don't think it's just bad people, just some, sad thing that's happening. I think it's representative of the system. Capitalism, like I said, is not designed for personal needs. It is designed to maximize profits, and it does that very well. It does what it's designed to do very well. Where do capitalists get their...
The whole debate is going on about capitalism. The thing that is always overlooked is where capitalists get their power.
Well, I think I've done a number of videos on where capitalists get their power. The state didn't develop in a vacuum. It developed to meet the needs of people with property, the elite. As James Madison said, they formed this government to protect the minority, the opulent, from the majority, to protect against what they saw as the leveling effect of democracy. So it's no mystery. I talked about the social registry, the close internetworking of corporations and their boards. To say that we give them their power, you have to consider the fact that the wealthy and, say the top 10% of the population own and control 80% of the wealth. I mean, practically anything you do is going to benefit them to some degree. It's like, criticizing a slave for working for his slave master. I mean, he does it out of necessity. We operate within this system as a matter of survival. So I think, it's obvious where they derive their power from. And if their power if it just depended on our stupidity, I don't think we would be spending trillions of dollars every year on the military. I think that goes without saying. They do spend a lot of money on force and violence.
So I think when you use capitalism as a scapegoat, you ignore something about society that should change. We talk about the system of economics. We don't talk about the driving force of that system, which is consumerism and materialism.
I fundamentally disagree with this notion that this system is driven by consumerism and materialism. I think that is a horrible argument, and I'll explain why. And to put it in context, consider the following. The United States in 2007 spent $303 billion on advertising. The rest of the world combined, $337 billion. That's nearly $1 trillion spent on advertising. Now, the beauty of this is you and everybody who's going to watch this believes that advertising doesn't work. That is the beauty of advertising. And I recommend you watch my video on the media monopoly. But the beauty of it is nobody thinks it works. But it does. It works. It works so friggin' well. They're not stupid. As you said, they're not idiots. And if the consumerism and materialism were so natural, just things that we need to fix within ourselves, one has to ask, why do they need to spend $1 trillion lying to us, feeding on our fears and our insecurities and manipulating us in a million different ways? If these things are so natural, just things that we need to work on within ourselves. You see, the elite don't believe what you're saying. And you can tell by how much money, how much energy, how many resources they engage in manipulating us. It's no accident. They're not stupid. They're not idiots. We're idiots because we don't think this stuff affects us.
Better than getting on and saying just capitalism is nuts, won't you get on and say, you know what, I think these are good companies?
That's like asking why abolitionists didn't sing the praises of good slave owners. It's an illegitimate form of authority. You're asking an anarchist to praise a benevolent ruler. That's just ridiculous. The fact that one company may treat its slaves a little better than another company is of no consequence for me. I'm an abolitionist, and we have to abolish these illegitimate forms of authority. Punkoutlaw also had this to say about taxes.
But so much of it is wealth redistribution.
Wealth redistribution, I agree, just in the inverse. And I think the mainstream argument usually is to some effect that taxes redistribute wealth from the top to the bottom. The reality is it works in the opposite. In fact, I mean, you just look at the widening gap between the rich and the poor in this country. If the gap were closing, and we were paying 60% of our income, gross income, to taxes, as you say, then you might have an argument, right? That would make sense. You'd be like, well, we're stealing all this money from the rich and we're giving it to the poor, and we're having a leveling effect, the kind that James Madison and the constitutional framers warned against. But we're not seeing a leveling effect. Since 1980, CEO salaries have skyrocketed. In 1980, the average CEO made about 40 times more than his average employee. Now it's, hundreds and hundreds of times. I forget what the last estimates I saw were. 400, 500 times more than the average employee. Wealth is getting further and further concentrated into a very small minority. That's the reality. It is an upward redistribution of wealth, and we see that in, you're talking about foreign aid. That directly is money that goes to, all kinds of U.S. companies, on and on. The arms deals that we have for Israel or Colombia, that is money going in directly into the pocket of weapons manufacturers here in the United States. So much of the research in the pharmaceutical and high-tech industries is completely funded by the public. I mean, all these things, it's just one less thing they have to pay for. Now that pharmaceutical company can spend that money on advertising rather than have to spend it on silly things like research and development. That's my take on it, bro. Capitalism is it's not a system that works. It's been proven not to work over and over and over again. And when you hear the global protector of capitalism, George Bush, telling us that we have an oversupply of housing, it's not because he's stupid or he doesn't know what he's talking about or he's a bad capitalist. That's capitalism. That's how it works. That's how it operates. It might not be your dream capitalism, but that's capitalism out in the real world. And that's capitalism's #1 speaker and protector. All right. Peace.